There's been a lot of controversy recently about the rules of professional wrestling. I would definitely say that this controversial started at the beginning of 2025 when this picture here that you see as the cover of this presentation shows that I won the Undisputed British Heavyweight Championship only to have it taken away from me. That is not where my attention to rules started, where my interest for the rules of professional wrestling has started. Obviously, I'm a professional wrestler. Professional wrestling has been a part of my life for over half my life, and the rules of it are very important and something that I pay a lot of attention to. This is the ultimate guide to the rules of professional wrestling. Number 1, who am I? Hi, I'm David Francisco. I am a professional wrestler. I'm a professional wrestler with over a decade of experience. Professional wrestling has been a part of my life for over half my life, so that's a good place to start, right? Also, I am a champion in multiple promotions over the years. I have plenty of championships under my name, so not only have I been for a big tenure in professional wrestling, but also a successful tenure in professional wrestling, and he continues to be successful and more successful, right? Is David Francisco a rule in professional wrestling? He rules, not sure if that's the same thing. Rob, you answer for me. Perfect answer, that's great. David Francisco rule, listen to the visionary. The David Francisco rule is actually here on this presentation. I'll touch back into that. In fact, currently, I am a champion. I am the current Purpose Wrestling and the current UKPW Inter-Regional Champion. So, I am still finding and will continue to find more and more success as we go. If you see here behind my head, I'm going to move away. On your right is the Purpose Wrestling Champion, and here on the left is the UKPW Inter-Regional Championship, blurred because it looks good on stream when the background is a little bit blurred, but the titles are still there, right? Also, under my name, the biggest accolade in my life, I am the actual Undisputed British Heavyweight Champion. Have been since February. It is a point that is still in contention until I, at the very least, get a fair rematch for my title. But actually what should have happened and what's fair to happen is for me to be given my Undisputed British Heavyweight Championship. I think that everyone, ever since that day in Southampton, everyone that has that championship is actually an interim Rev Pro Undisputed British Heavyweight Champion until they fairly defend that title against me. So that's who I am. Here's another question that is important for what we're doing here. How do I know what I'm talking about? I have all these credentials and that is fair, but that is not in itself important or that relevant to the specific topic that we're talking about here today about the rules of pro wrestling. It may be good when it comes to success in professional wrestling, and I obviously can talk about that as well, but how am I an authority in rules of professional wrestling? Well, let me show you an image that can paint a bigger picture of my experience and my authority when it comes to rules of professional wrestling. This is me, half a life ago, refereeing, and that is Rob Van Dam's butt, yes, refereeing Rob Van Dam versus Lance Cade, maybe the highest profile match I have refereed in my life for the countless and countless matches that I have refereed before my full-time in-ring career. So how do I know what I'm talking about? Easy. I have years of referee experience before my full-time in-ring career. International experience. I got to, for example, the first time I went to Barcelona, I was 17, and the reason I went to Barcelona is because they needed an experienced referee. I remember the main event of that show that I refereed was Pac versus Super Crazy versus Matt Cross, for example, and I was trusted to do that. Baby Francisco kind of looked like an accountant. I had that haircut for the majority of my life until the pandemic. And at the time, I was already shaving. I already had beard. I had beard from very early. But that's what I look like. Also, a haircut was something else. I think there's a lot of people that like see me with grown hair right now and don't know that I have like an entire life where my hair was short. But yeah, also, peep the look. The Portuguese referees at the time looked like waiters. Look at that. It looks like once this match finishes, I gotta carry 3 plates in my arms to table 4. I also have over a decade of experience as a trainer, and that role as a trainer requires me to be able to teach others what the rules of professional wrestling are. It is important that in my role in inviting and welcoming people into the world of pro wrestling and making sure that they know how to properly navigate it, I am teaching them well, which means that I need to know with intricacy a lot of spots and things about professional wrestling that aren't just the in-ring competition and being a competitor in ring. Therefore, have to make myself an authority in a lot of aspects of pro wrestling. The rules of pro wrestling are one of them. And this is another factor that contributes to me being an authority in what we're talking about here. I am also one of the smartest people in wrestling, paying attention to the deepest of minutiae. My wrestling IQ, and probably my IQ in general, is relatively high. I have shown throughout the years of pro wrestling, and I think I've got a lot of people that have met me in 2025 that have seen that side of me, that I am very intelligent in general, and also when it comes to professional wrestling. A lot of people that I respect come to me for advice and knowledge, have thanked me for the discussions that we were able to have being beneficial to them. And the crowds regularly chant, David is a genius, at things that I do in the ring. So this isn't me just saying it out there. This is a general agreed position by all stakeholders in professional wrestling that I am one of my biggest positive points is my smarts. Can confirm as one of the people who worship him after getting advice. There you go, Moose. Moose knows. Moose knows that I am very brilliant, and he has, as well as Ben, can vouch for me as a trainer and my knowledge of the rules of professional wrestling. I am not emotional at all when it comes to the rules of professional wrestling. It benefits me to know what the rules of professional wrestling are, because I have no dog in the fight. A well-defined set of rules gives me more ownership of my job as a professional wrestler. It's going to be one of the themes, one of the crossing themes of the presentation that we have here, but the clearer the rules are, the more the power is in the hands of the professional wrestler that follows those rules. Because by us knowing the rules means that we know what we're getting into when we start the contest, when we start the match. We know what the goalposts are. We know what we are allowed and not allowed to do. That is predetermined and decided before the bell rings, as opposed to being in the hands and the decisions, the immediate decisions of a referee or any other entity. And the fact that that is the case, the stronger and the more well-defined a rule set is, the more power I have as a professional wrestler when I am in the act of the professional wrestling match. Think of it as a football player, for example, or maybe think of it as like if you're a gamer. If you go into a game and there are aspects of the game that can be decided on the whim of a human, for example, and most commonly the referee, but not always, then you feel like you don't have full power and ownership of the thing you're doing. You have to also make sure and satisfy and make sure that a certain other person is on your team or agrees with you in specific situations. You're not just playing the game, but you also have to have discussions about the game. So I don't have a dog in the fight. It is important to me that the rules are well defined, regardless of what those rules are. The more well-defined they are when the bell rings, but a priori, before the match itself, the more power I and all my fellow professional wrestlers have in the match itself. And last but not least, and maybe we can call this the David Francisco rule, this fact.
Am I wrong? Have I ever been wrong? I am not wrong!
That is the David Francisco rule. I'm usually right. Usually right implies a gray area. You're right, Anthony Russell. I'm sorry. I'm always right. I've never been wrong. Moving on. If we're discussing the rules of professional wrestling, we have to talk about what a rule is. For us to be able to define the rules, we have to be able to define a rule. Okay? I did a little bit of research. I found a definition that is the simplest definition for me to put here on this presentation. All the definitions are basically that I found are basically in agreement with this definition here. A definition by the Cambridge Dictionary that states the following. Rule: an accepted principle or instruction that states the way things are or should be done and tells you what you are allowed and are not allowed to do. I think we're all in agreement with this, and I would invite anyone that's watching this right now to challenge this definition if you have any challenges to this definition. Oxford Dictionary is the standard in the UK, even better. I'm glad that I went for it, right? breaking this down a little bit, an accepted principle. So something that if we try to break this down from the perspective of the usage of a rule in a sports context, right? An accepted principle. So something that all parts involved have accepted. And in very broad terms, the root of the word principle is rooted in beginning, right? So it's the starting point of the context that's going to happen. In principle, in the beginning, as a starting point, it's basically a rule is a starting point that is accepted and agreed by everybody, right? Or an instruction, and that implies the idea that a rule is put in place by someone, even if not everyone is in agreement of it. That rule can also be put in place by someone, and you either accept to play the game with the rule, or you don't accept the rule, and therefore you don't play the game. The referred to source is very well done. Wrestling Uni went. Thank you very much, Ben. Well, the Wrestling Uni already exists. It's the London School of Wrestling, right? States the way things are or should be done. The way things are is related to the conventions necessary to be in place for something to take place, right? For example, we're not going to read this rule here today. I'm not going to give you a list of rules and stuff. We're just going to discuss the rules. We're going to give. This is a guide to the rules, right? But obviously, a wrestling, or in the majority of the times, a wrestling show or a wrestling match needs to happen in a wrestling ring. What constitutes a wrestling ring is part of the way things are. And then there's things like the way they should be done. Even though it is not like if you tackle someone in a dirty way in football, that immediately the game ends, right? But there are consequences to certain actions in football or in any game. That's where fouls are from, right? And that the same thing implies in professional wrestling. That's what the should be done part can be applied to, right? Similarly, continuing the idea of the foul tells you what you are and are not allowed to do, right? It's a guide to not just what you are doing, but also how you can and how you cannot do the thing you're doing. The chat hasn't contested anything that is here. I think that we are all collectively in agreement that this definition is a good definition for a rule. A couple of principles that I think we can also agree on and that I think we need to address before we move on into this presentation, right? First principle, rules should be objective and should not be open to interpretation. This is just another retell of that beginning part of the rule, the idea that is an accepted principle. Everyone is already in agreement of a rule and what that rule means before the contest starts. The more objective a rule is, the less open to interpretation a rule is, the better the rule is. It is important to everyone that the rules are objective, except one party, and I'm going to talk about that party. But I think that very few people will be able to think of rules as a concept and not agree that the closer to perfective objectiveness a rule is, the better that rule is. When we discuss interpretation of rules, it is very easy to then bring up the referee. But I think this is a principle that needs to also be in place, and everyone can agree with this. The job of the referee is to enforce the rules, not to interpret the rules. What I mean by this is, the referee is not a judge. It's a policeman. The referee already knows what the rules are because the rules are already being cleared out. The job of the referee is to make sure that the participants are abiding by the rules that everyone has agreed to. It is not, and it shouldn't be, the job of the referee to interpret the rules as they are happening. And it's not fair to ask of that to referees. It is too much responsibility to put on them. The rules should already be objective. The referees should know what those rules are, because that way the decisions they are making in the moment they need to make a decision cannot be placed on them in a personal level. The referee can always point at the rule set and almost in a way, and in a positive way, shield themselves behind the rule set when enforcing a decision. The easier it is for a referee to point at a rule to accompany a decision he makes, the better that rule is and the better it is for the referee. If the referee needs to interpret the rules, if there is a gray area in those rules that the referee can interpret, means that the referee can be argued against. And if the referee can be argued against, the referee will lose power. And the game will become worse. The competition will suffer. I continue to put forward that the more objective the rules are, the better it is for the competition. And definitely the better it is for me as a professional wrestler and for all the professional wrestlers. If this is the case, I think that there's a question that we've been asking here that is important to clarify now. And the question is, why has clarity of rules been bastardized over the years? As we discuss the rules here, we do not have a document that we can point to that will clearly state the rules of professional wrestling. And there isn't anywhere where those things can be agreed. As I sit here and I do this presentation, I still cannot quote every single thing that I am saying here. All this presentation is empirical. My own knowledge, my own experience, not my own opinion, because this isn't me giving my opinion, this is me giving the facts of the things that are done. But the rules of professional wrestling are, and they seem to be, almost like word-of-mouth rules, taught from generation to generation. And there isn't a document that, to my knowledge at least, a referee in training can be given that will say, here are the rules of pro wrestling, the same way that other sports will have that document clearly clarifying what the rules are. Maybe the reason why that is because there isn't an agency that will be able to create that document. But let's explore that a bit further, right? Why are the rules of pro wrestling not clear? First of all, promoters will always want to protect their stars. The job of the promoter, not just in professional wrestling, but in any sport. I'm not talking just about professional wrestling here, right? I'm talking about any sport. The job of the promoter is to be able to maximize profits. The business of professional wrestling is to sell tickets and more. And the product that is being sold is stars. The lack of clarity on rules allows promoters to twist the rules in order to maximize profits. There are known practices by promoters across a multitude of sports that are in place purely to protect the stars. In very generalized terms, and I am not an authority on the boxing business, but I am aware that very rarely will you have star versus star matches in boxing, because once someone is a star, you want to make sure they continue to win their matches. Therefore, you're going to book them against other boxers that are not as good and will almost definitely lose to the star. The biggest glaring example of promoters exploiting the lack of clarity or rules, or just outright changing them for the benefit of their business, is what is called the Bruno Sammartino cage match escape rules, right? Up until cage matches became a big thing during the Bruno Sammartino reign at Madison Square Garden, and I am not a wrestling historian, I apologize if I have some of these facts not totally right. I'm only going from my empirical experience here. But if I'm not mistaken, up until Bruno Sammartino's cage matches in Madison Square Garden, cage matches were won by pinfall or submission. Or maybe sometimes not even pinfall, just submission. The promoters of WWF figured out that the audience of WWF would much rather prefer and would think of Bruno Sammartino as a bigger star by seeing Bruno Sammartino pummel an opponent in the cage and then leaving the cage and closing his door behind. In current terms, they would think that would be badass as hell, and the audience also would think that, therefore that is the thing that they wanted to see, or at least, and I wasn't there, I didn't know what happened, the promoters manipulated the audience to do that. And then, the cage match escape rules stayed as a way to promoters to protect their assets, because if matches can end with an escape of the cage as opposed to pinfall or submission, then you can put big stars in these matches, and they don't have to suffer a pinfall or a submission, losing a little bit of that star power. If they lose, it is more likely they will lose the easiest way they get to lose or win a cage match, which is to leave the cage. Here's a blatant example of blurry rules or manipulation of the rules benefiting the promoters. When the rules aren't clear, the promoters get to benefit from it. The lack of clarity of rules takes power away from the pro wrestlers and transfers that power to the promotions. The more gray the rules are when it comes to their clarity, the less the pro wrestlers know exactly what they're getting into when they're getting into a match. And that power gets transferred to the people that are wanting to manipulate the situation and the potential outcomes of the contexts that are happening there. Gray areas in rules allow promotions to manipulate results to their interests. That is basically the point that I am putting forward here. Before we go into the rules, let's talk about some notable documented rules that exist here. I'm going to talk about two examples here. The first one is a document that you can very easily find if you Google pro wrestling rules, which is the 1974 NWA Major Rules Change document. People refer to that as a document that states the rules of pro wrestling from NWA, but that is not the right way to approach that document, because that document includes changes to the rules, but it's not the original rule set. The document is called Major Rule Changes. It's an addendum to a rule set that is not found, at least to my knowledge and my investigation, anywhere in professional wrestling. Also, there's the argument that 1974 was over 50 years ago, and some of those rules may not fully apply to things these days. And I'm going to talk about a few examples of that throughout the rest of the presentation. So I don't think that document is enough to base ourselves on the rules. Here's another notable documented rule set. It's the Admiral Lord Mount Evan rules. Anthony Russell is mentioning it here. I'm going to read this message here. Mount Evan rules were made to help making wrestling more acceptable to the folk who run venues. Pre-World War II, you had essentially pro wrestling with no rules. I think the rules are lovely. I wrestled under Mount Evan rules plenty, and it's very fun. But the world has changed. The same way that the Mount Evan rules came to create a change that was necessary, other changes were necessary. And this is now 2025, and the audience has changed as well. The rules change in sports to accompany a lot of things, like what does the audience want? Didn't the offside rule on football change relatively recently? The rules will change to search for fairness, or because the audience just demands it, right? Sometimes there'll be an attempt of making a sport or a contest more interesting, and the rules will be changed to do that. Those changes of rules are fair because they will always happen before the competition itself, so people know what they're going into. It may be frustrating to have things changed, but at the end of the day, when you start the game, you know exactly what they are, you're going to get something to reference to. So the rules also in pro wrestling also changed because American pro wrestling became globalized, WWE became the reference when it comes to professional wrestling, and it influenced everywhere around the world, right? And it's what the audiences want to see. Currently, the Lord Mount Evan rules is a rule set that has the equivalent value to a rule set of a stipulation match. Any match that happens under Admiral Lord Mount Evan rules is kind of a stipulation match because it's not what is seen as the base match. How does UK rules compare to other countries? Presumably Lord Mount Evans is UK only. The rules are the same everywhere across the world with a few exceptions when it comes to count out and other differences. But a match like the one that happened yesterday at Rev Pro has very few, if any, differences to a match that happens in Mexico or a match that happens in Japan or a match that happens in America. The differences will be structurally, right? Japan has 20 counts mostly as opposed to 10 counts on the outside. Mexico tends to do a lot of 2 out of 3 falls matches as opposed to just singles, especially when it comes to championship matches. But these are kind of like structurally as opposed to being things that the referee needs to pay attention to, right? When it comes to those base things, they tend to be the same across the world. There is no direct connection between the Lord Mount Evan rules matches and the rules that happen in the majority of wrestling in UK today. That's why it is easier to see it as a stipulation, right? In this presentation, we're going to focus on the currently enforced rules, what is generally accepted as a singles match. Right, it was important to do all this preamble and discuss all these things so that we have the right mindset and we can have all these concepts to reference to as we discuss the rules of professional wrestling, right? So let's go into the rules, let's discuss the rules themselves, and there's different perspectives that you can approach when discussing the rules. The way that to me it's the easiest and the one that I'm going to use in this presentation is we're going to discuss the rules from the perspective of them defining how you win and lose a match. And everything that is discussed when it comes to rule of pro wrestling can be discussed around how that basically brings the match to a decision, how it can get you to win or lose a professional wrestling match. Let's discuss the ways to win a professional wrestling match. There are 5 ways to win a professional wrestling match. This is the time the chat is going to get interactive because this is how I'm going to ask you to tell me in the chat what are the 5 ways to win a professional wrestling match. Let's go. Phoebe, ref stoppage, pinfall, submission, DQ, and G359. Hello, welcome to the chat. I hope you're enjoying the stream. Pinfall, tap out, sell more merch. Whoever sells more merch gets the thing. Well, we would never book me against Trent Seven or Leon Slater. Renegade, pinfall, submission, DQ, countout, and stoppage. I presume ref stoppage, right? Awfully waffly. Pinfall, submission, DQ, ref stoppage, and countout. Pin, submission, DQ, injury, stoppage, countout. Interesting, the separation there of injury, right? Pinfall, submission, DQ, knockout, and countout. You are missing one, lunatic. Emma, what's up? Pin, submission, DQ, countout, ref stoppage. Some of you have been paying attention to the streams. I appreciate it, right? Yeah, like we got a few correct, like nailed correct answers on the stream, right? Pin, submission, DQ, knockout, countout, ref stoppage, right? Knockout counts as a ref stoppage. We're going to talk about that in a second. The 5 ways to win a professional wrestling match. Pinfall, submission, countout, disqualification, and referee's decision, also known as referee stoppage, right? I think these terms can be interchangeable. These are the 5 ways a match can end, and we're going to discuss the rules of pro wrestling from the perspective of how they apply in these 5 ways for a match to end, right? Pinfall is when one wrestler pins their opponent's shoulder blades to the mat for the count of 3 by the referee. Let's discuss what the shoulder blades are. The shoulder blades are this part of your body right there. I'm wearing a vest, not because it's really hot in this room, but promise you, it's not because I'm sweating buckets as I'm setting up this, but it's because I want to show you what the shoulder blades are. Look at these jacked shoulder blades right there. I can't reach out because I'm too jacked, but it's the bone of the shoulder blades right there. If you have your arms straight, a good reference is the idea that it's in line. It's the part of your back that is in line with the bottom of your arm. So this line right here, and then they point to the shoulder blades, which are that part right there. I can't reach. Where's my... This area right here. That area right there where this end is. That's the shoulder blades, right? That little bone there. Lishi, are we counting a draw in ref's decision? It depends what led to the draw. There are situations where both wrestlers are pinning each other. For example, there's such a thing as a double inside cradle. I think the last famous example of that was a CM Punk Daniel Bryan match in WWE. Maybe there's more recently, but where they both caught themselves in an inside cradle and they both had the other wrestler's shoulder blades down. The decision was a tie via pinfall. If by any reason 2 wrestlers have the easiest example of this is there is a hold, forgot the name of it now, but it's basically like an ankle pick where you can be on the floor, you have someone's leg, someone's ankle around your forearm, and you're putting it on at the same time that the other person can have your other leg and put the same submission on you. If you both tap at the same time, that is a draw via submission. Obviously, this is such a abstract and almost impossible scenario, but as we're discussing things in the abstract level, which is the level we need to discuss them, because these needs to be established before we are able to use them, right? This is basically what it is, right? Let's discuss a few things regarding the pinfall. We have established what a pinfall is, okay? Let's talk about a few things that are important to discuss when it comes to the pinfall. First of all, the pinning wrestler, the wrestler that has the pin on his opponent, must be in an attacking position. And this brings us to the Lapatia fake paradox. What is the attacking position versus the defensive position? This isn't the position in terms of the form your body is on, right? It's not like position is in like statue position, but it comes from the, it's basically when you're in a wrestling match, you're always doing one of 2 things. You are attacking or you're defending. I think this is pretty easy to understand, right? Someone is attacking when they are on offense, and someone is defending when they are not on offense. It is hard for 2 people to be on offense at the same time, but it can happen. It also can happen that you change between the attack and defending position extremely rapidly, multiple times within 1 second. Especially in cruiserweight matches where everyone is being super fast, but something the referee needs to keep track of is the idea that someone needs to be in attacking and defensive position, and it's much easier for that to happen when we are talking about decisions, pinfall or submissions. And that brings us to the Lapatia fake paradox. So what is the Lapatia fake paradox? This is Lapatia, known as the surfboard. It is the most well-known Mexican hold. I'm sure you've seen this hold plenty of times, popularized by into the world, the general world, by Jushin Thunder Liger. Here you can see at the time Daniel Bryan applying it to CM Punk. You will notice that the referee is not counting Lapatia as a pinfall. You will also notice that the referee, like an idiot, is checking if Daniel Bryan's shoulder blades are down. We can blatantly see that Daniel Bryan's shoulder blades are down, and you will blatantly see that every single wrestler that has a Lapatia applied has his shoulder blades down, and he has a wrestler on top of them. However, we never see referees counting the pin for the La Patilla, and we would find strange if wrestlers would count the pin for the La Patilla. I'm not saying the hold properly. Tapatilla. La Tapatilla. Apologies, I wasn't saying the name of the hold properly. La Tapatilla. The reason why referees are not counting the pin during La Tapatilla is because CM Punk in this position is not in the attacking position. He is in the defending position. He is suffering a hold. Daniel Bryan is the one on the attack. And sometimes for you to be on the attack, you have to have your shoulder blades down. Train Days, welcome to the stream. No downward pressure from the one on top. Exactly. Absolutely. There is no effort by CM Punk to make a pin down, right? Because CM Punk cannot do it because he's defending. He is not attacking, right? I think that the idea that force down needs to be applied can be dangerous because there are plenty of holds where you're trapping your opponent in a position where he has the shoulder blades down, but you're not putting pressure down. A mousetrap is a trap, not a pressure hold down. Inside cradle, the same thing. You're rolling your opponent into a specific position, but you're not then actively pushing it down. You're just holding him there with his shoulder blades down. And I know that if we go super interestingly, we can argue that the leg is putting pressure down, but there's no active pressure down. I think... In fact, I know that seeing it from the perspective of who's on the attack and who's on the defense is much better. But it's a trap to push their shoulders down on the mat to hold their blades down for the count. Exactly. It's to hold their blades down for the count, not to push their blades down for the count. There are plenty of situations where we push the blades down for the count. Here's another example. You have seen referees rightfully count pins on figure 4 leg locks. How many times have you seen someone suffering a figure 4 leg lock and then the referee counts the pin? That is a very fair pinfall attempt, but there is really no pressure down on the shoulder blades for the shoulder blades to be counted. But it's still fair because the person that has the shoulder blades down is on the defensive position. They're the ones suffering the hold. Oh my god, this is so petty and I'm in heaven. It's important to be petty. It's important to be petty when it comes to rules. The confusion and the ambiguity when we're discussing pressure on the shoulder blades is the reason why I don't think that is a good argument to determine what makes a pinfall legal. And I think there is really no argument when we're discussing attacking and defensive positions in professional wrestling. This isn't a paradox. The thing we're seeing right now on the screen is not a paradox. There's no paradox with the tapati, with the idea that the person putting the hold on now has their shoulder blades down. We can all agree that Daniel Bryan should not be counted. He should not be considered to be on the pin. So it's a fake paradox. And the fakeness of it has to do with the attacking and defending positions, right? That is much more objective. And here we're looking for objectiveness, not leaving things open to interpretation. Lying down for a rest when you've got sore legs. Again, if you're the person with the figure 4 on, it is not fair that the referee counts you, but it's very fair if you're suffering the figure 4 that the referee counts your shoulder blades because you're in the defending position. And we've seen that happen before. And no one bats an eye, no one questions that. We can all in general agree that that is fair. If I have you in a sleeper hold and we're on the floor with the legs around you, and I have you raised on top of me and my shoulder blades are down, but the reason why that is because I put you there, then my shoulder blades should not be counted. But if the reason why that is the case is because you actively manipulated my body for me to have my shoulder blades down, then that was a counter. You became an attacker, and my shoulder blades should be counted. These are the kind of things that referees, that the only way we can justify this is by getting the referee to decide it on the time. But by thinking about attacking and defensive positions, we are giving the power to the professional wrestlers to be able to do things, to be in control of what's happening. Do I see the referee check the shoulders? Yes, I do. He is an incompetent referee because he is checking the shoulders and the shoulder blades of Daniel Bryan are down. He just knows he should not be counting here. I think he does that. I don't know why he does that. It might just be out of instinct because he's a referee. But we can all agree that no one should count the Daniel Bryan shoulder blades, even though his shoulder blades are down. We can blatantly see those shoulder blades down. That's one of the principles on pinfalls that is important. Here's another principle of pinfalls that is also important. All wrestlers must be in the legal area for the pinfall to be legal. We now need to introduce another point that is very important, which is the legal area. Contextually, it's known as the inside of the ring. I think we should not use the term inside of the ring because it can be very ambiguous. Because what inside of the ring means when we're discussing the rules of pro wrestling is different to what it means when people are talking like, oh, can you put this inside the ring? I really do not want to, and I think we should all run away from using the term inside the ring when discussing the rules of pro wrestling. The idea of using areas is good because It is the term that is also used in other sports, right? There is a penalty area in football, for example. And the binary here is the binary between being legal or illegal. So there is an area of the ring that is the legal area. What is the legal area? This is very easy to understand. It's the area of the ring inside and excluding the ropes. It is this simple. Inside the ropes, excluding the ropes. I'm going to make this even simpler. I've got graphics, right? This is the ring. This is the legal area. The green area is the legal area, right? Inside the ring, legal. Outside the ring, illegal. Here's the rules of professional wrestling and plenty of cases I can show you that things abide to and then become controversial when people don't abide by them. The apron of the ring is illegal. If a wrestler is standing on the apron of the ring, he can continue to be counted out. Referees tend to be lenient on that, and I think it's fair for them to be lenient on that. I was fair when I was lenient when I was a referee. I was also fair. Sometimes I continued to count wrestlers out when they were on the apron because they were being too passive. And I wanted to force them into action and into the match, right? I have that power as a referee. I can use the countout for that. That's the point of the countout. So apron is not part of the legal area. The ropes are not part of the legal area of the ring. Legal area of the ring is everything inside and excluding the ropes. I cannot make it more clear than this. The discussion around rope breaks happens with too much of an emphasis on the rope because, and it happened in my match in Sheffield against True and Lacey. There is footage of this, Will Caven grabbing Mark True's foot and putting the foot under the rope. It doesn't touch the rope, but it's still considered what we colloquially call a rope break. The thing that happened is that the referee saw that there was a part of the body of one of the participants in that pinfall attempt that was outside the legal area. Therefore, the pinfall was not legal anymore. Both people involved in the pinfall attempt need to have all their body parts inside the legal area. I remember being in PE and seeing in my PE book very clearly stated like a graphic of like the goal line and the ball on different parts of that goal line and what was considered a goal and what wasn't considered a goal. Only once there was no part of the ball on top of the goal line was the ball finally a goal, right? This is the same thing. Every single part of the participants in the pinfall attempt needs to be in the legal area. The legal area is inside and excluding the ropes of the ring. A pinfall is legal when everything is inside the ring. A pinfall becomes an illegal pinfall when any body part, when any part of the participants in this pinfall attempt goes outside the legal area of the ring. A pinfall that at any point becomes illegal cannot change its status to legal. The moment the referee determines that a pinfall is illegal, then that pinfall attempt in itself cannot suddenly become legal. There has to be an active action by the wrestler in the attacking position to do something to make that pinfall legal again, and then that means that the count by the referee needs to be restarted. This sounds like it's a complicated concept, but it's very easy to explain. You're a wrestler, you're going for a pinfall attempt, the referee counts one, and then he sees that there is a foot under the ropes, right? Your opponent has his foot under the ropes. That opponent is in a legal position, therefore that pin is not legal. The moment you grab that leg and manipulate the position of your opponents to have all their body parts inside the ropes, you have actively taken an action to change that pin. Therefore, it's a different pinfall attempt. Therefore, the referee needs to count from one the pinfall attempt. Pinfall attempts become different when there is a change to the positions of the participants in. Damn right, I know. As I said, rule of David Francisco, I'm always right. I'd fully argue you have to break the pinfall in its entirely, just like with any submission. I wouldn't disagree. I don't mind leniency by the referees in the pinfall situations. I would mind that leniency in submissions. I personally wouldn't mind that, don't mind leniency of referees when it comes to these pinfall attempts, but I do not mind at all the idea of like an enforced fully break of contact between the participants to then re-contact for a new pinfall attempt. Like I got nothing against it. So you can't just grab the leg after it touches the ropes. You can, but technically it becomes a different, by you grabbing that leg, it becomes a different pinfall attempt. Therefore the referee is now good to count, right? The argument that Rain Days is putting forward here, Emma, is that you have to literally stop touching your opponent and touch him again. And I think referees tend to be lenient with the idea that you don't completely break contact for it. But because you change the position somehow, it immediately counts as a different pinfall submission. The reason why I don't mind the leniency is because the referee restarts the count. The count only starts when the position of the pinfall is correct, where in a submission, the submission is an instant decision, right? The pinfall is a 3 count, and I think that is the reason why I don't mind the leniency in pinfalls, but I'm very against the leniency in submissions, because there's still a process after the change, if that makes sense. So that is the most common way of determining the winner of a wrestling match, or a decision, determining a decision in a wrestling match. A tie is a decision, a no contest is a decision, which is the pinfall, okay? Let's move on to the next one, which is the submission. What is a submission in professional wrestling? Is when one wrestler submits, a decision happens when one wrestler submits by tapping out or verbally submitting, right? We got the famous tap out. We got the, oh, I quit. Yes, I submit. Both of them have the exact same value. Both of them are submissions, okay? A few notes when it comes to the submissions here. Wrestlers don't have to be in contact for a submission to occur. I don't think we've ever seen this in professional wrestling, and if it did, I am not knowledge of it, but I've seen this in, for example, MMA, where one of the fighters simply, there's no contact between them two. And I think the most recent case I've seen of this, it was just basically a fighter that is way better than his opponent. And this was like amateur fighting, so there wasn't like a professional for money or whatever. After like he realized that that was the case, he very graciously tapped the floor and he quit. They were both standing, they were separated, they were about to engage again in combat. And before they did, he just like took a step forward, crouched down, tapped the floor, and that was a submission. The decision there was a submission by that wrestler. He lost by submission. He didn't even count for his record, so he didn't mind doing that at all. And the same thing can happen in pro wrestling, right? A wrestler can just tell to the referee, I quit. And that's a submission. Ding, 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 ring the bell. He's done, okay? Very similar to the pinfalls, all wrestlers must be inside the legal area for the submission to be legal. And on top of this, just like with the pinfalls, the rule is exactly the same. A submission that at any point becomes illegal cannot change its status to legal. The moment the submission becomes illegal, there has to be, in the case of submissions, a break. Just like in the case of the pinfalls, a break as well, although there's leniency there with the referees in general. But definitely in the case of the submissions, a break for the submission to be legal again. Again, what is the legal area? Here is the description of the legal area. The moment a body part of either of the participants in the submission touches or crosses the line of the legal area, immediately that submission is illegal. Here's some outrage scenarios for us to understand this rule here, okay? If I put you in a bulldog choke on the outside and I drag you into the ring, the bulldog choke doesn't automatically become legal just because we are now fully in the legal area. It is not legal because it started in the illegal area. It started illegally. The hold was illegal because for a hold to be legal, all participants must have their body parts, the totality of their body, inside the legal area. We would feel like it would be outraged if, let's use the bulldog choke, so let's use Jon Moxley as an example. If Jon Moxley is sitting on the apron, has his opponents with his feet on the outside, grabs him in the bulldog choke and just drags him inside the ring, rolls him in and keeps the bulldog choke on. That is not valid. That is illegal. We've seen things like the tarantula holds that happen on the ropes, and the referee will do a 5 count for the break. Important to remember, technically, if your opponent has no contact with you and you verbally give up while in the ropes, because you've broken the legal plane of the ring, your verbal submission will not count. It's niche but useful to know. Absolutely. That is 100% correct. Is there any rule about a manager being able to submit on behalf of a wrestler, like throwing in the towel? I'm not covering that here, but the throwing in the towel of a manager is a submission. Definitely counts. Another outrageous example. You have a sleeper hold on in the middle of the ring, you roll under the ropes, the sleeper hold goes on the outside, and without breaking the sleeper hold, you drag your opponent back into the ring, into the legal area again. Unacceptable. Everyone can agree that this would not be a legal hold anymore, because it's basically the first example we did, but with extra steps. We can all agree this is not acceptable. I think we can all understand what the legal area is. Therefore, if someone lightly brushes the rope when they're in a submission, either putting it on or suffering the submission, that hold is not legal anymore. A part of a participant's body left the legal area. It's over. It doesn't matter if it's the full body, like the example I just gave, or just a tiny pinky finger, the submission has become illegal. One of the participants crossed the legal area line. Here's an example of this. It would be outrageous in football for someone to be playing by the sideline. I think it's called the sideline, correct me if I'm wrong. They end up getting the ball to get out of the sideline, but they continue playing and they bring the ball back inside the sideline. And the play continues. It would be outrageous for the play to continue. Everyone would be angry at the referee and wanting for the play to stop because the ball has left the field, the legal area of the match. This is the exact same example. It doesn't matter if it was just a little bit and he was able to bring it back in again. It's over. There is an objective rule that has to be followed and enforced. There is no gray area and ambiguity here, no matter how much AI hallucinates this. We can all agree this, right? Is anyone not in agreement with this? Anyone wants to argue for the gray area? I don't think anyone does. And I think I've made it very clear why it is not a positive thing to argue for the gray area and who benefits from people arguing for the gray area. Not unless Dave Bradshaw is here. Dave Bradshaw is paid by Revolution Pro Wrestling. I think he's protecting his interests, right? So yeah, a submission that at any point becomes illegal cannot just by itself change its status to legal. There has to be a break for a new submission to be put on. And it doesn't even mean, it doesn't matter if it's just like, whoop, and then you put it back on, but it has to be legal. We've seen this a lot. There's a lot. I can show you a lot of footage on specific like headlocks, right? A referee catches a wrestler like grabbing a hair in the headlock and tells him to break the headlock, break the hold, and the wrestler just goes up, breaks the hold separation, immediately gets back the headlock back on, and no one bats an eye. The hold became legal again, but there was a visual separation and break. That's the submission, right? Let's move on to the next way that a match can end, which is a countout. Countout is when one wrestler gets counted out by remaining outside the legal area, ignore the extra L there, for the duration of a predetermined count by the referee. We have determined what the legal area is. I don't need to show the graphic one more time, but I will for fun. That's the legal area. If a wrestler willingly remains outside, no, actually willingly is not a fair condition for this. If a wrestler remains, willingly or not, outside the legal area, past a predetermined count period that is going to be shown as the count by the referee, then he will be counted out. So if you have a sharpshooter and you reach the ropes, it's not enough to just pull them back in. There needs to be a total separation. Yes, DMR, exactly. Exactly. Or perhaps a half crab. Yes. 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 He's a piece of shit, but I stand for him when it comes to this case specifically. A few notes on the countout. Most of the world has a 10 count for a countout. Usually countouts are very much referee's discretion when it comes to the rhythm. Referees tend to be instructed to be lenient when it comes to both wrestlers being on the outside because the fans want action, right? And we usually, and I think fairly, referees will just want they don't want to interfere too much in the action, right? Most of Japan and other specific promotions like Ring of Honor, I don't know if still, but until very recently, have 20 counts on the outside. That is just a way for promotions to incentivize the action going outside of the ring. Again, everyone knew a priori what they were getting themselves into, so valid. The referees can only keep track of one count. There can only be one count going. You cannot do different counts for different wrestlers, no matter how much certain games want that to happen. I'm looking at you, Wrestling Empire. Love that game. Referees can only keep count of one count. There's no two different counts for different wrestlers. Therefore, referees will not break the count, and notice how the count is a concept, important concept here, right? Referees will not break the count, with capital C, to other participants that are remaining outside the legal area if one of those participants enters the ring, right? Just because one of the wrestlers comes in the ring, the referee will continue the count because he was counting both wrestlers out, and one of them has been able to save himself from being counted out, but the other one hasn't, right? But when wrestlers leave the ring, the count needs to be reset. Referees have to reset the count if one participant exits the legal area while a countout is taking place, because it is not fair that the new wrestler that is out doesn't have the same amount of the 10 count, right? It's not fair for you to come out and immediately be counted at 6. That can be seen as referees' interference. Therefore, because referees can only keep one count going, because if not, it would be asking too much of them, and we want to keep this simple and clear, when a wrestler leaves the legal area, the count resets to 1. I fully disagree with leniency. The sport matters, the rule matters. If you're telling referees to be lenient for the fans' viewing benefit, you're introducing bias at the very core of what should be a fair sporting contest. I don't disagree with that. I'm just giving you the reality of the situation. I think there will, when it comes to countouts and the rhythm of a countout, there will always be leniency, there will always be differences. If we don't want for that to happen and we want this to be as fair and as strict as possible, then we take away the count from the referees and we put a timer on a screen, a predetermined timer on the screen, and the job of the referee now becomes to determine if the wrestlers have come back in before the count ended or not. And I think that is the only solution I can find that would take away the power of the timing of the counts to the referees. And I think that's not fair, because we have one person whose job is to keep the rules. Now it becomes more than one person whose job is to keep the rules, right? And I also they might not be feasible for the business of wrestling to get more than one referee involved, just because it's like the referee that's the main referee and then the count out referee, the same way that you have side referees with the flags and now you have VAR referees in football, right? I don't know, maybe that's a conversation that would be interesting to have, right? PWG era Rick Knox disliked this message. PWG was a promotion that incentivized leniency by the referees when it comes to countouts, right? Thank you for explaining why the count resets with a roll in and out of the ring while opponent remains outside. I never fully grasped that. This is the point of this stream. That's what I'm trying to do here. Bring clarity to rules, right? Hopefully that makes sense. It sounds like it did make sense. That is the countout, right? Wrestler doesn't get to be able to get in the ring, get back in the legal area of the ring by the count of the referee that has been predetermined beforehand. He gets counted out. The victory is given to the other wrestler. If both wrestlers get counted out, then it's a tie via countout, right? The decision is a tie due to a countout. Disqualification. The referee disqualifies one wrestler from the match, awarding the win to the opponent. So this is fully on the referee's decision. Artidero lived on the referee following the action through the stands instead of counting both out. Used to annoy me a lot. That still happens to this day. And I've been in matches where the referees has decided to do that, and I think it's because the referee realized, like, hey, Dave Francisco is wearing jeans. This is being sold as like a chaos match. The last thing that we want now is to not give the people the chaos, right? Again, we could argue if that is the fairest thing to do, because again, like, I agree with the idea of Drain Days of like the sport matters, therefore the rules matter. But I think that sometimes leniency is the fairest thing for the wrestlers involved. I want to tell you that we're not going to go through an extensive list of things that can be a disqualification, right? Because this is long enough. Let's look at disqualifications in purely in the way that they can end the match, right? There are 3 categories of disqualification offenses, right? A disqualification offense is a thing you do that can warrant a disqualification at some level, and the level that warrants a disqualification are these 3 categories that we're talking about, right? One is the verbal warning. You do something that the referee gives you a verbal warning for. The second one is the 5 count. We all know what the 5 count leading to a disqualification is. And basically, the 5 count is a more serious verbal warning. It's a way to empower the referee to get the wrestler to stop the action that he's taking, to stop the disqualification offense that he's in the midst of. Right? You see this a lot with engaging with an opponent in a defensive position while that opponent is against the ropes or against the corner. The reason why that is a disqualification offense is because by being against the ropes or against the corner, it makes it harder for that wrestler to be able to turn it around and become the attacking wrestler, right? Like, it takes away the ability to do that. So the referee wants those situations to be minimized, to give the defending wrestler an opportunity to turn things around and become an attacking wrestler, right? To be in an attacking position. Therefore, the 5 count gets engaged of like, this is how long you have, right? Again, the referees have leniency when it comes to the speed of the 5 count, right? And you've seen 5 counts that are what we consider like the slow normal 5 counts, and you've seen angry referees who just 5 count really fast because it's the 3rd time that this is happening, right? And they are really trying their best not to disqualify you. The 3rd category is an immediate disqualification. Pretty obvious, something happens, immediately the referee will call for a disqualification. What actions belong in each category depend on the promotion and the current meta of professional wrestling, right? For example, the punches. Punches used to be an immediate disqualification offense, and they have lately obviously become only verbal warnings. The circumstances will determine in which category the disqualifications offenses are, right? So the time we are in, the country we are in. A note that I have on this, something that has been irritating me a lot lately. It is outrageous that pulling the referee out of the ring when the referee is in the middle of a pinfall count is not an immediate disqualification and is only a verbal warning. It is outrageous that someone would do something that blatant and it doesn't count to the disqualification. Because if a pin is happening and someone comes in and breaks that pin by attacking the wrestlers, it is an immediate disqualification. But if the same result happens by pulling the referee out, putting the hands on the referee, which is usually an immediate disqualification, it only becomes a verbal warning. And I think that this needs to change. Gideon moans about closed punches all the time. Yeah, it's a disqualification offense. Closed punches are not legal in wrestling. But I use closed punches all the time because they are only verbal warnings. I know that the only thing I'm going to get is a verbal warning. If I am careful with how many punches I use, I can get away with it. We're going to leave disqualification there when it comes to talking about it, but obviously we could do 2 hours on the disqualification offenses and the kind of things that warrant a disqualification offense, which category they belong to, and should they be in that category. And last but not least, the referee's decision. It's basically when the referee decides to end the match and there is no obligation of the referee to determine a winner by ending the match. Please set up a campaign to stop this. No, I'm a professional wrestler. I will take advantage of the fact that this is the case. Someone else can deal with determining the rules. Right now, I know what the rules are, I know what the consequences are, and I'm going to play the game. It is not my job to determine how the game is played. It is my job to play the game. I'm just explaining to you how the game is played. That's the point of this stream right here, to clarify some confusions that have been happening lately. Let's talk about a few common instances of matches that end via referee decision. This is not an exhaustive list. There are more examples, but these tend to be the most common ones, right? The most common one is submission. When a match ends because a referee determined that a wrestler is not able to return to an attacking position, then that is a referee's decision to end the match, but it ends the match via submission, right? These are kind of like interchangeable. A wrestler that gets choked out loses by submission, but that is a submission. It's a referee's decision submission. That one goes under the category of referee's decision because, again, making it very plain, it was a decision by the referee that ended the match as opposed to a decision by the wrestler. I quit to end the match. Does that make sense? That's why it goes under the referee decision category. That it's the onus of that decision is on him. Another instance that's very common is a no contest, right? The referee determines that the conditions aren't met for the match to obtain a decision anymore. Like, stuff has happened. The ring broke. The referee like, oh crap, this ring broke. The conditions aren't met anymore for this match to happen. The match was happening and suddenly 17 people ran in and decided to attack the two participants of the match. I don't think I can determine a winner after this. No contest. Anything that implies the referee not being able to, in fairness, determine a winner anymore or come up to a decision when it comes to the match is a no contest. Side note, there has been plenty of referees throughout history who cowardly it's called a match and no contest as opposed to disqualifying the person that should have been disqualified and awarding the winner to the other person. It doesn't happen as much, but it used to. Sometimes referees will hide behind no contests to not have to make a decision. If a wrestler got arrested mid-match, is this a no contest? Yes. If the police comes in and says, excuse me, that wrestler is going to jail right now, the first thing that happens legally is the referee stops the match and declares it that no contest, and then the police action happens. No matter which wrestler goes to prison. If you are the one getting arrested, you don't lose the match. The match is a no contest. Here's another very common instance of a match ending via referee stoppage. An injury. The referee determines that a wrestler has sustained a long-term injury, or at least fears that that is the case in a match, and then protects said wrestler that has the injury or is suspected to have the injury from suffering further damage, even if that wrestler seems capable of returning to attacking position, right? So a big part of the job of the referees is also the safety and security of the wrestlers. And sometimes that is like even from themselves, right? Referee sees that you have a broken arm. You may be able to continue to wrestle. You may be able to come back to an attacking position by doing drop kicks and stuff. But the match needs to end. You have a broken freaking arm. This is not just a match injury that is quick to go, even though it may suck in the moment. This is a long-term injury that can get more aggravated and can have a longer lasting impact in your life if you continue this match. Therefore, the match needs to end right now. You're injured, and usually the other wrestler gets the decision to themselves. Not always, but usually that is the case. Especially if he was the one that injured you. That is a referee's decision. And these are the 5 ways a match can end. These are the parameters within which the match can end. There is more to say to disqualification referee's decision, but it's mostly itemizing them. I don't think I can be more clear when it comes to the rules of professional wrestling. Weirdly enough, the responsibility for wrestler safety was the reason climbing the ropes and attacking your opponent from an elevated position was illegal. Exactly. There was a belief, probably back when wrestlers were much bigger and injuries from climbing up the top rope were more common, that doing that would injure an opponent more often, therefore it became illegal, right? It became cause for disqualification. Same with throwing opponents over the top rope. At some point in America was considered a disqualification. And if you look at the disqualifications, same way as like fouls in football or anything, the reason why they're there is to put a barrier in the things that wrestlers can and cannot do to each other so that there aren't long-term consequences of specific things that happen in wrestling matches. It's about the safety of the wrestlers. Like, rules are also there to make sure that the safety of the wrestlers is guaranteed. Let's talk about, go for a note on stipulation matches. Let's break down what a stipulation match is. We're not going to go through stipulation matches here today. I just want to touch on them and then give you an example of it, right? A stipulation match is purely a match where these rules, these standard rules, are added or taken away, or modified. Modified can be another way to put it. It's easy to understand the addition of rules or the modification of rules. Win happens when you touch 4 corners, as opposed to win happens when there's a pinfall, right? Yeah, you're completely replacing what brings a decision in a match with something else. But the most common stipulation matches actually are matches where rules are taken away. And the most common variety is the no disqualification variety. Basically what we're doing is we are deactivating, the name says one, but it's actually 2 of the ways a match can end. Colloquially, no disqualification matches are also no count out matches. These are 2 different decisions, but both of them get disabled in a no disqualification match. A no disqualification match can only end by pinfall, submission, or referee's decision. And as we've discussed, a disqualification is not the referee's decision. Those are 2 different things, even though they appear the same, because the visual form of them is the same, is the referee calling for the bell. It is important to clarify that in no disqualification matches and in variations of the no disqualification matches, the legal area of the ring still is the same. There is no change to the legal area of the ring. This point is still in effect. So pinfall and submission still have the same parameters to be considered legal. Nothing has changed when it comes to the legality of a pinfall or a submission. Those rules are still active. The difference is that the referee now has no power to enforce the measures to counter disqualification offenses, like rope breaks, right? So this is a very common confusion, misconception in wrestling matches, which is rope breaks in no disqualification matches. There are no rope breaks in the no disqualification matches. That is true. The referee has no power to order for a submission to be broken, for separation to happen in a no disqualification match. That doesn't mean that the submission continues to be legal. If a wrestler grabs the rope, the referee instructs the wrestlers, and especially the attacking wrestler, that that submission is not legal anymore. That wrestler keeps the hold on, and the wrestler that grabbed the rope taps out or passes out. It is not fair for the referee to award the win to the attacking wrestler, because the hold is not legal anymore. Nothing changes there. Same with pinfalls. There are rope breaks in what we call the rope break pinfall in the no disqualification match, because the pinfall is not legal anymore. The moment the wrestler puts his foot on a rope, the pinfall is not legal anymore. The difference, that is the thing that makes the difference between a no disqualification and a false count anywhere match. A false count anywhere match, this idea, basically what a false count anywhere match is that the legal area, that what we've discussed as the legal area of the ring, expands to the world. There is no more an illegal area of the match. Decisions can happen anywhere. Hopefully that was able to clarify this, right? So the rules have become more lenient over time. Yes, 100%. There is much more allowed in wrestling. I cannot think of an example of something that has been more enforced, that went the other way of becoming less lenient. And I think some things should go, right? And then it also becomes a little bit like the meta of wrestling. Things that didn't used to be like disqualifications or paying attention to now become. Like there's been some examples in tag matches in WWE especially where like matches end because of an unwritten rule of you're allowed one break per participant in a tag team match. If the same person breaks a pinfall or a submission twice, then that team gets disqualified. But that is not a rule that is written anywhere. But then it has been enforced very rarely in WWE. It's silly. I think it's a silly rule. Or it's like either you make it very obvious and clear that that is the rule, or you don't. So in a no DQ, if you make the ropes, the submission doesn't count. Exactly. If you make the ropes in a no disqualification match, the submission is still illegal and should not count, and it does not count, and bad referees will allow it to continue. A wrestler can continue to put the hold on to put more damage to his opponent, right? You can't disqualify a wrestler by keeping a submission on after the submission is illegal. The referee has lost that power, but the submission is not legal. Therefore, it cannot count to a decision. Not really a rule, but concussion protocol has made ref stoppage more frequent, more strict than it used to be in those cases, because it used to be just, hey, they're fine, so keep going. 100%. Referees have been trained. That is a referee stoppage, right? The referee's decision. Referees have been trained to look for signs of concussion, and they've also been trained to be less lenient, to be more strict, to like, it's better to stop the match, even if there was nothing actually there, than to not stop the match and something actually being there, right? That's been definitely in the past 10 years, decade, was it 2005, 20 years now, right? Definitely like an effort in that case, but it's still different from company to company, right? Like in Japan, you won't stop a match for that, but in America you will, and here you will. Closed fists becoming lenient is the entire reason I absolutely hate American wrestling. Yeah, they just became more and more lenient, especially like around the time of the Attitude. No, even before the Attitude Era. What am I talking about? Yeah. So using a punch as a finishing move is fine because you don't do it again before you go for a pin. But if you do the punch multiple times, then technically, if you were warned, yes, exactly, the issue. That's why Big Show was able to get away with a punch as a finisher, because punches didn't become an automatic, over time stopped being a immediate disqualification and became a verbal warning. Therefore, if you only do one, it's fine. I take advantage of that. I punch wrestlers a lot as a countermeasure to stop their momentum. I'm not punching them all the time, but I definitely sneak in punches when I need to. I did one, yeah? Did I do one yesterday? Yes, I did. Because all I'm going to get is a verbal warning. Okay, cool. I'll take a verbal warning. There's no actual consequence to it. Obviously, a referee can, if he continues to give you the same verbal warning again and again, he can just decide to disqualify you. Very rarely have we seen a disqualification of a wrestler for being too naughty. You see that way more with 5 counts examples that don't get break, right? Sometimes famously known as disqualified for kicking too much ass. But I don't remember a wrestler being disqualified for the referee basically being like, okay, I'm done with you. Ding, ding, ding. You're not listening to me. Hang on. If a closed fist punch is illegal, could a ref refuse to count a pin off the back of a punch? Yes. Yes, he could. Japanese referees do this a lot, and I commend them from doing it. I think it's a great thing that they do. You will see a lot in Japanese wrestling, a wrestler attacking another wrestler on the outside, ramming into the barricade, yada, 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 throwing him into the ring, going for the pin, and like Red Shoes is the sassiest referee that I've seen doing this, where he goes like, no, I'm not counting this pin. You were beating him up on the outside. No chance I'm going to count this pin. It is not fair what happened here, and this is your punishment. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair for a referee to do. I don't think referees should be robots. As much as it doesn't pain me. It is what it is, right? I know that in Japan, I can beat people up on the outside, nothing's gonna happen to me. I know that when I throw them back in the ring, I should not put them in a pinfall because I know the referee's not gonna count it. I learned that lesson. Thank you. Like, we live in the real world. Final thoughts and considerations on rules. First of all, we're not talking about like my thoughts and considerations. We are getting away from the facts part to things that I consider. It was a mix, right? I think we can all agree with this point here, right? A well-defined set of rules takes decision power away from every human involved in a contest, which makes the contest more fair. The less the result of the contest has to be decided on the spot by humans, the more fair the contest is. If all we're doing is enforcing the rules that have been predetermined, then the better, the more fair, and the more fun the contest is, be it a professional wrestling match or a game of Uno. The best game of Unos are the ones where you before ask, okay, table, What rules are we playing with? As opposed to when something happens, you go, oh no, I play this way and I play this way. And you have to stop the game to decide which rule you're going to enforce. Grab that principle, apply it to professional wrestling. Here's a question, and I don't have an answer for this. I just want to put this forward, right? Having in mind the interests that promotions have that we discussed earlier in the presentation, who referees the referees? As I keep bringing up the Scottish ref specifically, as an example of maybe what can be a bigger problem, it's been fun to see Rev Pro not addressing the way that my title was taken away from me, or the way that that rope break should have been enforced, and standing by the Scottish ref's decision. And I understand that promotions will benefit from referees feeling like they have that power, because then promotions can ask referees to take certain decisions. But I don't feel anything. I'm gonna ask a question. Would it be in Rev Pro's best interests to have me as their champion? Would it be in Rev Pro's best interests to have TK Cooper as their champion? I'll even flip this the other way around. I'll ask to the air the same question that I've asked Amira Blair the other day on stream, just with different parameters. Is it not in the best interest of the promotion to make sure that there are no dark clouds floating over any championship reign? I believe it is, but this is just me on a stream, isn't it? And of course I would think this because you would benefit me, right? But I think I'm being pretty objective when I say this. I believe an official professional wrestling rulebook should be created, and I also believe it will never be, because the people that would have the power to push for the creation of this official professional wrestling rulebook are the same people that benefit from the rules being a gray area. Therefore, I don't know if... I am certain that something like an official professional wrestling rulebook will never be created. The next best thing is promotions having their own rule books, and then wrestlers knowing that in different promotions they follow different rules, which kind of already happens, right? If I go and wrestle in Japan, I will very likely have a 20 count as opposed to a 10 count, and the referees won't count the pin after I attack someone on the outside. But that is more... It feels to me more like the meta of wrestling and the culture of wrestling than an intent that comes from a well-documented set of rules. There should be an official professional wrestling rule book. If not that, then promotions should have official professional wrestling rule books. And I am certain that something like that will never happen. As I said, the people that have the power to do it are the people that benefit from it not happening there. And that's it. That is all the thoughts that I wanted to share with you, and that is all the rules that I wanted to share with you with this presentation. I now open the presentation to questions as I read the chat here. Let's keep discussing. Let's have some thoughts. Ask me some questions, not just here in the chat, but in the comments as well if you're watching this afterwards. Drain Days, what are your thoughts on the selective leniency shown by referees at certain British wrestling promotions run by Andy Quildan? I think I've made those thoughts obvious, right? I think that referees are human and they will make mistakes. I think that that is to be expected, and it should, as frustrating as it can be, it should not be made an issue. I think patterns of mistakes should be addressed, and I question the interests in the people involved to not address very obvious patterns of mistakes. From the fact that I don't have the Undisputed British Heavyweight Championship in this shelf right now, all the way to me being able to trip in front of Will Caven, and because of that, Will Caven being kicked out. If this is the way we're going to play the game, I am happy to play the game that way. I don't sit here on this chair and talk to you about false morality. The world is what it is. The game is what it is, and I play it. Is there a rule for when a referee can take over from the game ref? This is the gray area thing, because it becomes too much about referees' decisions. Here's my suggestion, and here's what I think it should be. And I know this will benefit me, but I promise you this is my belief, and it was already before the events of the Southampton show in February 2025. The moment the second referee joins the match, the power of decision should totally be transferred to that second referee. The reason why a second referee has joined the match is because the first referee has become impaired in some capacity. Why is it that the referee is so impaired that a second referee has to come out and take over his job, but it's only for a few minutes and then later he's able to make decisions normally? I think that is not fair to ask of that first referee, after his ability to make a fair decision was being impaired, to still make decisions. If things gotten so bad that a second referee has to come down to take over, then a second referee should come down and take over. Completely. And then after the match and the decision, things can be booked and made to address any issues. But I don't think that the moment a second referee comes down, the first referee should still have power of decision. The idea of like two referees having similar power of decision is gray area and is very dangerous for professional wrestling. There should be one person with the power of decision, and then that person should be able to be questioned and addressed after the match is over. That is my opinion. That's what it should be. And yes, to it being in everyone's best interest to be champion. I agree, Kat. RevPro would be even better if I was the champion like I should be. Some promotions have a head referee who has more power, I guess. The job of that head referee is to attribute the match to another referee. The moment he delegates the ref to another referee, then that referee has the power of decision. And it is not fair for that head referee to then come down and wall it down and be like, actually, I don't like this, so I'm going to change it. Therefore, that referee never really had the power. The referee that is supposed to be ref in the match never really had the power of decision. Going back all the way to the beginning of the presentation, when I'm talking about objectiveness of rules, the rules being abstract and objective gives power to the wrestlers. I am now, as a wrestler, having to worry about the potential decision this referee has to make and the potential decision the head referee that is not involved in this match has to make. Are we insane? VAR is not on the referee's decision. It's on a camera. It's objective. What is the referee seeing? It's objectively seeing this, therefore this is going to be its call. It is insane that I have to worry about the potential on-the-fly gray area decisions of two people. Rules should be objective and abstract. They should be clear for everyone. It makes the job of the referees much easier. They can hide behind the rule set. That's a good thing for them. Is a fan more likely to go to more shows when you or TK Cooper are booked? I would say yes, in their interest, because they would sell more tickets, specifically to me. Oh, us being champions, yes. But I'm too loud, aren't I? I speak too much. Paul G agrees. Thank you very much. ODN agrees. I appreciate it. Thanks for the support, gang. That's why you're the real ones. Emma, in a multi-man match, if you are hit and fall back onto another wrestler, does it count as a pinfall? I would say so. I would say so. Even if the wrestler that got hit and then fell on another wrestler didn't actively try to pin, everyone is still trying to get a pin, and equally important, everyone is still trying not to be pinned. The wrestler underneath is on a defensive position, therefore he's being pinned. It doesn't matter if the other wrestler isn't fully on an attacking position. The key is the wrestler being pinned being on a defensive position, not the wrestling doing the pin being on the attacking position, right? The onus is on the side of the wrestler being pinned being on a defensive position. Therefore, yes, it should 100% count as a pinfall. And that is like a particularity of multi-man matches, which is a stipulation match, right? I was certain this presentation was going to end with remember the rules only counted if the official sees. While I fully agree with that, I don't use that as like a zing gotcha. I don't like the concept of bending the rules, because I think discussing things like that, and I know that's not what you're doing, it just brings me back to that place. I think the discussion around wrestlers being good at bending the rules benefits the same people that want the gray area to exist. I am not good at bending the rules. I am good at playing the rules. I know what I can and I can't do, and the proof of that is that I haven't been disqualified for something I think I can do. I am not good at bending the rules. I am good at knowing what the rules are and playing them for what they are. Presenting what I do as being someone that bends the rules is a slippery slope to putting forward the idea that rules should have gray areas to combat these wrestlers that bend them. The only way you can defend yourself against a bad man who knows the rules is with a good man who knows the rules. That is an enormous slippery slope for abuse of rules on both parts. Rules should be obvious and clear so that they're not abused. The onus here is on the rules, not on the people that are putting them forward. Any variation of this wrestler is good at bending the rules is another path towards giving promotions more power over the rules. I'm not comfortable with modern referees having headsets while performing their duties. I am, but I can't explain why. I'm comfortable with it. I can't explain why. I think it's a good thing that referees can be communicated with and can communicate in the match. If a doctor needs to talk to a referee, it is much better for the referee to be in the action than it is for the referee to move away from the wrestlers to talk to the doctor. And we don't want the doctor to get in the ring either, because that's dangerous to the doctor, right? While I understand that that can be exploited and people can be talking to the referee, the principle should always be the principle of the innocence, right? Because there's the possibility of something happens doesn't mean that action should be taken. Only when something does happen, action needs to be taken, which means that like fiscalization needs to be much bigger, and then we need to make sure that we employ referees that will put the integrity of the rules and their own personal integrity above everything, which is hard. But I still think playing that risk is worth it for the referee to be able to maintain the safety of the wrestlers. I understand why you are not comfortable with it. At best, it distracts. At worst, who knows what they're being said to them. Yeah, I understand that. From everything that I said here, I still think that it's actually better for the referees to have the headsets. We need to make sure that it's very, like, it's fiscalized. Maybe there needs to be an impartial person that is on the same channel listening to the things that are being said, or maybe the channels need to be recorded. And I think that will help with keeping the integrity and the impartiality of referees. That's like a measure in place to maintain that. If I commit a crime and I'm wrestling, does the ref need to stop the match before I get arrested? Asking for a friend. Yes. First of all, any crime is a disqualification, right? You'll lose the match. But if, as we discussed earlier, if the police comes to the ringside and says, we are going to arrest that person right now, the first thing that happens is the referee, because the referee has authority inside that ring, the referee stops the match, calls it a no contest, allows the policeman to come in the match. So say I bring out a gun mid-match, the ref has to stop before I get arrested. As soon as you bring a gun out and show it, having in mind that it's a gun, immediately it's a disqualification. It's an immediate disqualification because the gun is one of the few weapons where you don't use itself as a weapon, you shoot the weapon. Right? If you bring a weapon into the match, like a chair, the referee can take it away from you. He's not going to immediately disqualify you just because you come in the ring with a chair. There's an argument that he should, but it's not what effectively happens. That is not the meta of wrestling, right? A gun is different because the moment you have a gun, it's like, okay, it's a trigger. So no, this needs to end right now, and this has gone too far. Legal if it's stipulation match of no DQ, plus according to the theory of closed fists, you can shoot them once for a warning. No, I think the gun goes into the category of immediate disqualification, right? But yeah, like in an ODQ, you can technically pull out a gun. The referee can then decide to stop the match through a no contest, you know, of like the referee still has that power and make it a no contest. And yes, there can be no contest in no disqualification matches, unless the match specifically says that there has to be a winner, right? Which means that the referee can immediately call for a submission by the other wrestler. Like, he goes in the same category as the injury. Like, you lose this match. The other person, like, even though you think you can defend yourself, you can't defend yourself from this. The other person wins. But to clarify, a no disqualification match is not inherently a match where there has to be a winner. Right, that stipulation needs to be added. How do you find out the local rules for the first time you wrestle at a promotion? You just have to watch previous matches and ask other wrestlers. In training, you'll be told the rules. Like, I teach my students the rules, and then I also teach them to, like, hey, double check. But usually this is going to be what you can expect. But at the same time, expect that sometimes you're going to be surprised with a rule or a referee that doesn't fully know the rules or has a different interpretation of what the rules are, because there's no official rule set. It's words, right? We just say it, you know. Getting arrested is not worth the match purse, though. I agree getting arrested is not worth the match purse. That's it. That is my presentation on the rules of professional wrestling.